My family laughed into my face when I asked for a fraction of what they gave my brother for his dream home. They told me a single woman like me should just go rent an apartment and leave the real estate to the man of the family. So I took their advice. I did not buy a house. I bought an entire empire in secret. 2 years later, when my brother was begging for a place to stay after losing everything, he asked if he could crash at my house. I looked him dead in the eye and asked which one. The evening stopped feeling like a family dinner the moment my mother reached into her designer handbag. We were seated at a prime table inside an expensive Chicago steakhouse, and Patricia had that satisfied look she wore whenever she was about to make one of her grand announcements. She pulled out a crisp cashier's check and slid it across the mahogany table toward my older brother Jason and his wife Ashley. I was 33, an investment analyst who spent my days evaluating risk market trends and other people's money. Yet around my parents, Richard and Patricia, none of that seemed to matter. Jason had always occupied the top rung of our family hierarchy. He was the future, the legacy, the man whose ambitions deserved to be financed. I was the daughter expected to work harder, ask for less, and applaud whatever he received. I had learned to recognize the pattern without needing a speech about it. That night, the favoritism stopped being something I could explain away as family habit. It became a number printed on the check sitting directly in front of us. "This is for you two," Patricia announced, her voice deliberately loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. $88,600. Exactly 20% for the down payment on that beautiful neoclassical home in Oak Park. Jason smirked, picking up the check and flicking it with his finger. Ashley let out a high-pitched squeal and immediately wrapped her arms around my mother's neck. "Thank you so much," Ashley gushed. "It is going to be the perfect place to raise a family and build the legacy this family deserves." I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap. I had been working 80-hour weeks analyzing market trends and managing portfolios for my corporate clients. I had lived frugally, saving every penny, driving a reliable 7-year-old sedan, and packing my own lunches. I was exactly $15,000 short of securing a conventional mortgage for a modest 2-bedroom condominium close to my office. Since they were in such a generous wealth-building mood, I thought this might be the moment to ask for a small bridge loan. I did not want a gift. I fully intended to draft a legally binding repayment plan with interest. I took a breath and looked at my father. "Dad, since we are talking about real estate, I actually found a great condo near the financial district. I have saved a substantial down payment, but I need a bridge loan of $15,000 to cover the closing costs and secure the rate. I can pay you back within 18 months with a 5% interest rate." The celebratory atmosphere instantly vanished. The warmth left my father's face, replaced by a cold, hard stare. He set his glass of scotch down on the table with a sharp thud that made the silverware rattle. "A condo," Richard repeated, his tone dripping with condescension. "You are a single woman, Rebecca. What does a single woman need to buy real estate for? Go rent an apartment somewhere like everyone else your age who has not settled down." I felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up my neck, but I kept my voice steady. "Real estate is an appreciating asset, Dad. It is a smart financial move. I have the income to support the mortgage. I just need a short-term loan." Patricia scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Do not be ridiculous, Rebecca. You are entirely too focused on yourself. Your brother is the man of his house. He is a pillar. He needs a proper estate to entertain and raise his children. Family money must be utilized to build the family legacy. Jason needs this capital to establish his foundation. Giving you $15,000 just so you can play independent career woman is a waste of resources." Jason chuckled, swirling his $1,000 vintage Cabernet. "Come on, sis. You do not need to stress yourself out with a mortgage. Just find a nice studio apartment. Maybe when you finally find a husband, he can worry about buying the house." I looked around the table at the three of them. I saw the absolute conviction in their eyes. In their minds, my hard work, my financial literacy, and my independence meant absolutely nothing because I did not fit their archaic narrative. They were handing Jason a fortune for a house he likely could not afford the property taxes on, while telling me I was unworthy of a loan I could easily repay. Instead of crying, instead of begging or defending my worth as I would have done in my 20s, I felt a sudden icy clarity. I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed against a folded letter from my bank, approving me for an unsecured personal credit line of $20,000. I had not wanted to use it because of the high interest rate, but sitting at that table I realized it was the key to my absolute freedom. I pulled out a $50 bill and laid it next to my half-eaten salad. "You are absolutely right, Dad," I said, my voice eerily calm and pleasant. "I should not bother you with my financial plans. Congratulations on the new house, Jason." I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and picked up my coat. "Where are you going?" Patricia demanded, her brow furrowing. "We have not even ordered the main course yet." "I am going to take your advice and focus on myself," I replied. "Oh, and Jason, since you are the pillar of the family, now I am sure you will not mind picking up the tab for that vintage wine you ordered. Have a wonderful evening." I turned and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. I did not slam the door. I did not make a scene. But as I stepped out into the biting Chicago wind, the final tether connecting me to their toxic expectations snapped. The very next morning, my phone buzzed before I even had my first cup of coffee. The caller ID flashed Jason's name. I answered, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "Rebecca, listen!" Jason barked through the speaker, not bothering with a greeting. "Ashley and I get the keys to the Oak Park house on Friday. The previous owners left it a mess. We are having a cleaning party this weekend. Bring your heavy-duty scrubbing brushes. You are used to doing the dirty work, so we expect you to handle the bathrooms and the basement." The sheer audacity of the request was staggering. Growing up while Jason lounged in the spacious master suite my parents handed him, I was relegated to the cramped, uninsulated attic. During brutal Chicago winters, I used to sleep in a winter coat because my parents refused to upgrade the heating vents up there. I spent my teenage years scrubbing floors and doing Jason's laundry while he was out partying. He genuinely believed that dynamic would continue forever. "I will not be coming, Jason," I said evenly. "I have other plans for the weekend. Hire a cleaning service with all that house money." I hung up. Less than 10 minutes later, my mother called, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Your brother just told me you refused to help him move," Patricia scolded. "You are being unbelievably petty and jealous, Rebecca. Just because we did not fund your little condo dream does not mean you can turn your back on family. You will be at that house on Saturday morning with a mop in your hand, or you will answer to your father." I ended the call without a word and blocked both of their numbers for the weekend. I had actual work to do. Sitting at my dual-monitor setup in my home office, I pulled up the city's municipal zoning databases. My parents thought I just crunched numbers for fun. They had no idea the level of market intelligence I had access to. I typed in the address of Jason's new neoclassical dream home in Oak Park. Within seconds, I found exactly what I suspected. Jason had bought a beautiful facade built on a sinking ship. The city council had just quietly passed a preliminary motion to rezone the massive vacant lot 3 blocks behind his new neighborhood. It was going to become a heavy industrial waste processing plant. Within 18 months, the constant noise, heavy truck traffic, and industrial odors would plummet property values in that specific radius by at least 40%. My parents had just handed him $88,000 to buy a depreciating liability. I closed that tab and opened a different file. I had been tracking a foreclosed, dilapidated multifamily brick building in a gritty, overlooked neighborhood on the south side. To an amateur, it looked like a terrible investment with peeling paint, sagging porches, and boarded-up windows. But the public planning record told a different story. Buried inside an approved transit package was a new station scheduled less than 2 blocks away within 3 years. The information was public, just ignored by investors chasing prettier neighborhoods. If the project stayed on schedule, that block was positioned for aggressive redevelopment. I did not buy the comfortable condo. Instead, I wired my entire life savings combined with the high-interest personal loan I had just accepted and bought that rundown multifamily building straight from the bank in an all-cash transaction. I secured it for a fraction of its future value. My hands shook slightly as I signed the digital closing documents. I owned a broken-down building, I had zero safety net left, and I was deeply in debt. But I had an asset that was entirely mine. 3 days later, the reality of my rebellion hit my family. I was sitting in my glass-walled office on the 22nd floor of my firm when the receptionist buzzed me. Before she could even announce the visitor, my office door swung open. Patricia stormed in, clutching her Prada handbag like a weapon, her face flushed with rage. Several of my colleagues paused their conversations, turning to watch the spectacle. "How dare you ignore my calls all weekend?" Patricia hissed, marching right up to my desk. "Jason and Ashley had to clean their own toilets because you threw a tantrum. But I am not here to argue about your immaturity." Ashley found a custom designer sectional sofa for the new living room. It costs $3,000. You are going to transfer that money to Jason right now as your housewarming gift to make up for your disgraceful behavior at the restaurant. I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the delusion. "You broke into my place of work to demand $3,000 for a couch." "Do not use that tone with me," she snapped, leaning over my desk. "You sit up here crunching numbers for other people's money and think you are so superior. Your brother is building a real life. He deserves this. You owe him your support." I calmly opened my desk drawer. 2 days prior, an envelope had arrived at my apartment. Jason, in his infinite stupidity, had used my address as a secondary residence on a credit application several weeks ago, likely hoping to use my pristine credit history by association. The bank had mailed the approval notice to my address by mistake. I pulled the document out and slid it across the desk toward my mother. "Jason does not need my money to buy a couch, Mom," I said smoothly. "He just got approved for a $120,000 auto loan at an absolutely predatory 9% interest rate. He bought a luxury Maserati the day after you gave him the house money. He is drowning in debt, and he has not even made his first mortgage payment yet." Patricia looked at the paper. Her eyes scanned the bold numbers. Her face went pale, and then in a flash of irrational protective rage, it turned a violent shade of crimson. She snatched the paper, crumpled it up, and threw it at me. Then she raised her hand and slapped me hard across the face. The sharp smack echoed off the glass walls of my office. My cheek stung, burning with sudden heat. "How dare you spy on your brother?" Patricia screamed, her voice shrill and echoing down the corporate hallway. "You are a bitter, spiteful little girl. You will wire us that $3,000 today, or you are dead to me. You will no longer be a part of this family." I did not touch my burning cheek. I did not shed a single tear. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling absolutely nothing but cold resolve. I reached forward and pressed the security button on my intercom. "Yes," Rebecca, the security guard, answered immediately. "Frank, I have a trespasser in my office who just physically assaulted me. Please come escort her off the premises immediately. If she returns, call the Chicago police." Patricia gasped, stumbling backward as if I had shot her. "You cannot do this. I am your mother." "You were my mother," I corrected, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. "Now you are just a liability. Get out." I watched silently as 2 large security guards marched into my office and physically guided a screaming, humiliated Patricia toward the elevators. The moment the doors closed behind her, I picked up my phone and called a corporate attorney I frequently worked with. I took the $3,000 my mother demanded for a sofa, and I used it to pay the attorney's retainer. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, I had officially established an anonymous limited liability company. My name was completely shielded from public records. My dark empire had officially begun, and my family had absolutely no idea the storm that was coming for them. 2 years passed with the quiet, relentless intensity of compounding interest. My anonymous real estate holding company finalized the acquisition of its 4th property on a brisk Tuesday morning. It was a massive mixed-use commercial building right in the heart of a rapidly revitalizing downtown district. I signed the final electronic transfer authorization from my corner office, watching the funds move flawlessly into escrow. My net worth had skyrocketed into the 8-figure range, completely shielded behind layers of corporate protections, blind trusts, and ironclad non-disclosure agreements. To the outside world, and specifically to my family, I was still the stubborn single 33-year-old investment analyst who threw away their support and struggled to pay rent in a cramped, overpriced city apartment. The illusion was exactly how I wanted it to remain. But my family could never resist an opportunity to flaunt their perceived superiority over me. The heavy gold foil invitation arrived at my apartment building that Thursday. Jason and Ashley were finally hosting their official housewarming party. It had taken them 24 agonizing months just to afford the basic furniture for their neoclassical Oak Park mansion. It was a delay they constantly blamed on supply chain issues and contractor disputes rather than admitting the truth about their crushing automotive loans and runaway consumer debt. Tucked inside the formal, pretentious invitation was a yellow sticky note featuring my mother's sharp handwriting. It read, "Be there by 2 in the afternoon." The catering staff fell through. "We need you to handle the appetizers and keep the drinks flowing. Wear a black uniform." I stared at the handwritten demand. They wanted me to serve as unpaid waitstaff for a house my mother had slapped an $88,000 down payment on. I could have thrown the invitation directly into the trash and blocked their numbers again. Instead, I picked up my phone and sent Jason a brief message confirming my attendance. I did not intend to serve a single shrimp cocktail or pour a single glass of champagne. I was going purely for the entertainment value of watching a catastrophic financial disaster masquerading as a triumphant family milestone. When I pulled up to the Oak Park property that Saturday afternoon, the cracks in their perfect facade were immediately visible. The sprawling manicured lawn they had bragged about on social media was patchy brown and dying. A cheap, poorly installed vinyl fence had been hastily erected to block the view of the empty lot behind the neighborhood. But a flimsy piece of plastic could not block the distant heavy rumble of commercial construction equipment. The city had already broken ground on the new industrial waste processing plant. I walked through the grand double doors and was immediately intercepted by Patricia. She thrust a heavy silver tray of bacon-wrapped dates into my hands before I could even take off my coat. "You are late," my mother snapped, adjusting her diamond necklace and glaring at my dark tailored suit. "The guests are already arriving in the sunroom. Keep the drinks flowing and do not try to mingle. Jason has invited several important managing partners from his firm, and we do not need you complaining about your rent prices and depressing the mood. We want everyone to focus on your brother's success." I took the silver tray from her, offering a brilliant, entirely unbothered smile. "Of course, Mom. I would absolutely hate to ruin the illusion of wealth you all worked so hard to build." I bypassed the sunroom entirely, walked straight into the formal dining room, and set the tray down on the nearest wooden credenza. I wandered through the echoing halls of the house, observing the reality of their situation. The furnishings were embarrassingly sparse. The grand living room boasted the infamous $3,000 designer sectional sofa, but the walls were completely bare. The window treatments were cheap paper blinds, and the dining room lacked an actual dining table. They were living house poor in the most literal, suffocating sense of the word. I found Jason standing in the center of the kitchen, loudly holding court, with two older men in expensive tailored suits. He was swirling a glass of expensive bourbon, his face flushed with the arrogance of a man who genuinely believed his own lies. "Property values in this specific zip code are practically exploding," Jason boasted loudly, clapping one of the suited men on the shoulder with forced familiarity. "My realtor says this place has already appreciated by at least 20% since we closed the deal. It is all about knowing exactly where to plant your capital, gentlemen. Real estate is the ultimate kingmaker in this economy." I leaned against the cold marble countertop, sipping a glass of sparkling water I had just poured for myself. It was genuinely fascinating to watch him lie so effortlessly to professionals. Anyone with a basic understanding of local zoning laws knew this specific residential block was facing a catastrophic plunge in market value. Jason caught my eye across the kitchen island, and his confident smile immediately tightened into a scowl. He nudged his empty crystal glass across the counter toward me, gesturing with 2 fingers. "Rebecca, grab another bottle of the good bourbon from the pantry, will you? Make yourself useful for once." I did not move a single inch. I just looked at his empty glass, took a slow sip of my water, and looked back up at his face. "The pantry is right behind you, Jason. You have perfectly good legs. Get it yourself." The two older men exchanged awkward, uncomfortable glances, suddenly deeply interested in the kitchen tile. Jason's face darkened with a flash of genuine, unbridled rage. He stepped away from his guests, marching around the island toward me with his jaw tightly clenched. "Do not embarrass me in front of my bosses in my own house," he hissed under his breath, leaning in close so only I could hear. "You are only here because Mom begged me to let you see what actual success looks like. Now go get the bottle before I throw you out the front door." I held my ground, meeting his furious gaze with absolute chilling calm. You look a little stressed out, Jason. Are you sure you should be drinking so much liquor right now? You might want to keep a very clear head. I hear property taxes in this county are being reassessed and going up next month. A muscle in his jaw twitched violently. For a brief, glorious second, the arrogant mask slipped entirely, revealing the sheer suffocating panic underneath. He grabbed his empty glass, spun on his heel, and stormed down the hallway toward his private home office, slamming the heavy wooden door shut behind him. I waited exactly 30 seconds before following his path. I had spent my entire adult career reading people, analyzing debt, and balancing financial risk. Jason was a walking, breathing margin call about to default. I stepped quietly onto the thick carpet of the hallway and paused just outside the slightly ajar door of his study. Inside the room, the confident, booming voice he had used in the kitchen was completely gone. He was pacing frantically behind a cheap particle board desk, his cell phone pressed hard against his ear. His voice was a high-pitched, desperate whisper. I told you, I need the funds cleared by Monday morning. Jason pleaded into the phone, running a trembling hand through his hair. The auto loan is going to officially default on Tuesday, and Ashley maxed out our last available credit card on the patio furniture. Just push the paperwork through today. I leaned closer to the crack in the door, holding my breath to catch every word. I do not care what the interest rate is. Jason snapped, his voice cracking with undeniable panic. 14% is absolute extortion, but I will sign it. Just structure it as a second mortgage against the equity in the house. My parents paid 20% down in cash. There has to be enough equity left to pull 50 grand out right now. I listened as the person on the other end of the line clearly explained something highly unpleasant to him. Jason gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning stark white. Look, I am good for the money, he begged, his pride entirely gone. I make a great salary at the firm. Just send the digital contracts. Yes, I thoroughly understand the terms. Yes, I know it puts a direct lien on the property. Just email the documents to me right now. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I appreciate it. Jason collapsed heavily into his desk chair, burying his face in his hands, completely unaware he was being watched. He was totally trapped, bleeding cash from every direction and desperately mortgaging a house that was about to lose half its market value to a garbage plant. I stepped back from the door, my heart beating with a steady, rhythmic satisfaction. I walked quietly back down the hall, pulled my phone from my pocket, and opened my encrypted corporate email application. Jason had just frantically agreed to a secondary mortgage with a brutal 14% interest rate to cover his rapidly defaulting luxury car loans and mounting credit card debt. He had begged a loan broker named Mr. Caldwell to rush the aggressive paperwork. I knew exactly who Mr. Caldwell was. I also knew exactly which high-risk private lending firm he worked for. I tapped out a quick, decisive message to my chief financial officer. The private lending firm Jason had just desperately contacted to save his sinking ship was not some independent neighborhood bank. It was a subsidiary financial group that my anonymous investment holding company had aggressively acquired just 4 months ago. Jason was not just signing away the remaining equity of the house my parents bought for him. He was signing it directly over to me. The 14% interest rate on that secondary mortgage acted exactly as I knew it would. It was a powerful accelerant poured directly onto a raging financial fire. Jason had secured the $50,000 from my subsidiary firm, believing he had outsmarted the system. He thought he had bought himself breathing room. But people who live beyond their means do not use lifelines to pay off debt. They use them to fund their delusions. Less than 3 weeks after the housewarming party, my phone rang while I was reviewing quarterly acquisition reports. The caller ID displayed my father's name. Richard rarely called me during business hours. In fact, he rarely called me at all, unless he needed a designated scapegoat for one of Jason's failures. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. Hello, Dad, I answered, keeping my tone perfectly flat and professional. Rebecca, listen to me closely. Richard began, completely bypassing any standard greeting. Ashley needs a new luxury SUV. Her current lease is up, and the dealership is being completely unreasonable about the new financing terms. Jason has his capital temporarily tied up in other high-yield investments right now. I need you to co-sign the auto loan for her. It is just a formality. I sat back in my ergonomic leather chair, genuinely marveling at the sheer audacity of the request. My father, who had publicly humiliated me at a high-end steakhouse for asking for a modest bridge loan for a condo, was now demanding. I put my own pristine credit score on the line for his daughter-in-law's luxury car. You want me to co-sign an auto loan for Ashley? I repeated slowly, making sure I heard him correctly. Why cannot you or Mom co-sign for her? We already leveraged our available liquidity to secure the down payment on their new estate. He snapped, his impatience flaring through the speaker. You have absolutely no dependents, Rebecca. You have no real expenses living in whatever tiny apartment you rent. It is time you stepped up and contributed to the success of this family. Your brother is building a legacy and he needs support. He is building a mountain of unsecured debt. Dad, I replied, my voice steady and cold. I will not be co-signing a loan for a car they cannot afford. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by the rustling of the phone being passed. Patricia's voice immediately pierced my ear, shrill and dripping with absolute venom. You selfish, ungrateful little girl, my mother hissed. Blood is thicker than water, Rebecca. We are a family. Your brother is the pillar of this household. He provides the status and the grandchildren that you have completely failed to produce. You sit alone in your empty apartment hoarding your little paycheck while your brother actually lives a meaningful life. The absolute least you could do is use your credit score to help your sister-in-law drive a safe, reliable vehicle. Safe and reliable meant an $80,000 imported luxury SUV, but I did not bother pointing out the distinction. If Jason is such a successful pillar of the family, I said calmly, why is his credit score currently sitting in the low 500s? Why is he begging subprime lenders for cash? How dare you make up such disgusting lies about your brother, Patricia screamed. He is a senior manager at his firm. His investments are incredibly complex. You are just a glorified calculator. You could not possibly understand his financial strategy. I smiled at the empty room. Because Jason had submitted his complete financial disclosures to my private lending subsidiary to secure that desperate second mortgage. I possessed full legal access to his bank statements. I did not just know how much debt he had. I knew exactly where every single dollar of his newly acquired $50,000 loan had gone. Jason did not use the loan to pay off his previous car. He did not use it to fix the house. He was terrified of the impending property tax assessments and the heavy industrial zoning changes I already knew about. In a desperate, manic attempt to double his money overnight, he had funneled nearly $40,000 directly into highly volatile, unregulated offshore cryptocurrency gambling platforms. He was day trading imaginary digital coins and losing spectacularly. While Patricia was still screaming into the phone about my jealousy and my profound uselessness as a woman, I opened my encrypted file server. I took a high-resolution screenshot of Jason's most recent bank transaction ledger. The transfers to the offshore crypto casinos were highlighted in bright red. I am sending you a text message right now. Mom. I interrupted, my voice cutting through her tirade like a surgical scalpel. I suggest you open it before you continue lecturing me about Jason's brilliant financial strategy. I hit send. I waited in absolute silence, listening to the static on the line. A few seconds later, the notification chime echoed through the speaker. I heard Patricia gasp. I heard Richard muttering in the background, asking what I had sent. This proves absolutely nothing, Patricia stammered, though the unmistakable tremor of panic had invaded her voice. You fabricated this. You photoshopped this document because you are sick with jealousy. You have always hated your brother because he is everything you will never be. You are a toxic, miserable spinster, Rebecca. The transactions are fully verified, I replied, entirely unfazed by her insults. Your golden boy is a gambling addict who just blew the last of his home equity on digital slot machines. Do not ever call me to underwrite his failures again. You are dead to us, Richard bellowed into the phone, snatching it back from my mother. Do you hear me? Do not ever show your face at our house again. The line went dead. I looked at my phone screen. Within seconds, my parents and Jason had completely blocked my number across all platforms. They chose absolute blinding delusion over the hard, undeniable truth. They would rather cut me off entirely than admit their perfect son was a monumental failure. I set my phone down on my desk, feeling a profound, sweeping sense of peace. The silence in my office was beautiful. I did not feel a single ounce of grief for the family I had just permanently lost. They had never really been my family anyway. They were just people who shared my genetics and demanded my submission. A soft knock on my office door broke my concentration. My executive assistant, a sharp and fiercely efficient young man, stepped into the room carrying a sleek leather portfolio. "Sorry to interrupt, boss," he said, maintaining absolute professionalism. "But you asked me to set up an aggressive alert system for any prime real estate movement in the northern suburbs. Something major just hit the market 5 minutes ago." I sat forward, my interest instantly piqued. "Show me." He walked over and laid a printed real estate dossier on my desk. My eyes scanned the address and a slow, triumphant smile spread across my face. My parents lived in an ultra-exclusive, heavily gated community in the northern suburbs. They prided themselves entirely on their prestigious address. It was the absolute core of their identity. The property directly adjacent to theirs, the house right next door, was a sprawling, custom-built 12-bedroom estate that dwarfed my parents' home in both size and grandeur. The previous owner of that massive estate had been a tech entrepreneur who had recently filed for bankruptcy. The bank had seized the property, and in a desperate bid to liquidate the asset quickly, they had just listed it for a pre-auction cash sale at 20% below market value. It was a phenomenal investment opportunity on paper. But for me, it was something far more valuable. It was the ultimate stage for the final act of my retaliation. My parents had just told me to never show my face at their house again. They had banished me from their pristine suburban kingdom. I looked up at my assistant, tapping my manicured fingernail against the dossier. "Call the listing agent immediately," I instructed, my voice humming with dark anticipation. "Tell them an anonymous corporate buyer is offering the full asking price in cash with a guaranteed 3-day closing period. I want the deed to this estate secured by Friday." My assistant nodded, picking up the portfolio without a hint of hesitation. "Consider it done." I turned my chair to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling Chicago skyline. My parents had told me to go rent an apartment. They had told me I was useless. They had blocked my number and thrown me away to protect a gambling addict. They had absolutely no idea that their discarded daughter was about to become their new, incredibly powerful next-door neighbor. Within a month, the massive foreclosed estate beside my parents' home had been fully renovated and leased through my LLC to a stable family with 4 energetic children and 3 golden retrievers. My parents despised the new tenants almost immediately. They complained about noise, bicycles, deliveries, and the simple fact that strangers were living next door. Patricia repeatedly cursed the anonymous corporate landlord who had bought the property, while Richard insisted the owner was destroying the neighborhood's standards. They had no idea the landlord they were attacking was their own daughter, or that every complaint they filed was being documented inside the management system I controlled. The complaints escalated faster than the renovation ever had. First, Richard reported the tenant's basketball hoop to the homeowners association. When that went nowhere, Patricia called the city about bicycles near the side gate. A week later, they complained about one of the dogs barking while a delivery truck unloaded furniture. Then they called the police over a backyard birthday gathering that ended before the neighborhood quiet hours rule even began. Every report came back the same way: no violation. That only made my parents angrier. Because the property was owned by my LLC, they never reached me directly. They dealt with the management company, which meant every email, voicemail, and complaint eventually landed in the digital portal I reviewed. Patricia repeatedly demanded the landlord's personal number. Richard threatened to contact an attorney. They described the owner as a greedy speculator who was destroying the character of the neighborhood. I approved a taller privacy fence for the tenants and instructed management to document every interaction. A city inspector eventually visited after Patricia filed another complaint about occupancy. He found nothing wrong and closed the case. That afternoon, my mother left a furious message with the management office accusing the landlord of buying influence at City Hall. Richard followed with an email threatening to sue over declining neighborhood standards. My property manager answered with photographs, permit records, and the relevant ordinances. There was nothing for them to challenge. My parents interpreted every failed complaint as an insult. Their anger at the house next door might have continued indefinitely if Jason's finances had not started collapsing at the same time. The 14% second mortgage had given him temporary breathing room, but it had not changed his spending. The new money disappeared into overdue bills, Ashley's lifestyle, and the crypto positions he kept insisting would recover. One evening, the tenant's exterior camera captured Jason's luxury vehicle pulling into my parents' driveway. He stayed inside for nearly an hour. The recording had no audio from inside the house, but it did not need any. When Jason finally came back out, he was shouting. Richard followed him onto the porch. Patricia stood behind them holding a checkbook. The next morning, my father called my office. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I answered. Your brother is facing a temporary liquidity problem, Richard said as though he were discussing a corporate balance sheet instead of Jason's personal disaster. The interest on his house is higher than expected. Your mother and I have already done more than our share. It is time for you to contribute. Contribute what? Cash, he snapped. $5,000 to start. More if the bank keeps pressuring him. I actually laughed. 2 years earlier, $15,000 had been too much to lend me, even with interest, and a repayment plan. Now $5,000 was apparently a reasonable opening demand for a man who had already received $88,600 and borrowed against the house on top of it. I am not financing Jason's debt, I said. Richard's voice hardened. This is exactly why no one trusts you. You sit alone in that rental and watch your own family struggle. Then let the man of the family solve it. I ended the call. By the end of that week, Jason had visited my parents twice more. The second argument spilled into the front yard. The tenants next door sent management another incident report because Jason had parked across part of their driveway while shouting at Richard. Patricia later called the management office and blamed the tenants for spying on her family. The irony was almost impressive. My parents were attacking strangers living in a house I owned, while their golden child was quietly draining what remained of their money. They still saw me as the easiest resource left to seize. The next demand did not come as a phone call. It arrived in writing. My mother's text message sat on my phone screen, a glaring monument to her sheer, unadulterated delusion. It read, Your brother is struggling with the interest rates on his new house. You need to vacate your rental apartment immediately, move into our basement to help care for us, and transfer your entire monthly salary to Jason until he is back on his feet. I looked back at the text message demanding my surrender. I typed a single 2-letter word, no. Then I pressed send and permanently blocked her number. I knew the rejection would trigger an explosion, but I severely underestimated Jason's absolute lack of emotional control. 2 days later, I was walking to my car in the highly secure underground VIP parking garage of my corporate office building. The space was reserved exclusively for senior executives and high-net-worth clients. I was unlocking my modest sedan when I heard the aggressive echoing screech of tires on polished concrete. Jason's luxury sports SUV, the one he was currently defaulting on, sped around the corner and slammed to a halt, directly blocking my vehicle. He must have tailgated a corporate delivery truck past the security gates. Jason threw his car door open and stormed out. He looked completely unhinged. His designer shirt was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was sweating profusely despite the cool underground air. The crushing weight of his 14% secondary mortgage and his massive offshore gambling losses had clearly broken his fragile reality. You think you can just say no to us? Jason screamed, his voice bouncing wildly off the concrete pillars. You think you can disrespect our parents after they gave everything to this family? They built a legacy, and you are tearing it down by being a selfish, greedy little spinster. You owe me that salary to cover my mortgage. The bank is calling me every single day, Rebecca. I am going to lose the house, and it is entirely your fault for not helping your own blood. I stood my ground, slipping my keys into my coat pocket. You are a 35-year-old man throwing a tantrum in a parking garage because you gambled away the equity on a house you could never afford. Move your car, Jason, or I am calling security. He stepped closer, his face twisting into an ugly, desperate snarl. You are not calling anyone. You are going to authorize a wire transfer right now, or I am walking straight upstairs to your human resources department. I will tell them you are sleeping with executives to get your promotions. I will spread rumors so toxic you will be blacklisted from every financial firm in Chicago. I will ruin your life just like you ruined mine. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I just stared at him with absolute freezing contempt. You ruined your own life the second you thought you were smarter than the market, I replied smoothly. Now move your car before you do something that gets you arrested. The complete lack of fear in my voice was the final trigger. Jason let out a guttural scream of pure frustration. He spun around, marched to the trunk of his SUV and ripped it open. He pulled out a heavy steel-shafted 9-iron golf club. He turned back toward me, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with manic aggression. You need to learn respect, Jason roared, raising the club above his head. You need to learn your place. He did not swing at me. Even in his rage, he knew the severe consequences of physical assault. Instead, to intimidate me and assert his supposed dominance, he swung the heavy steel club with all his might at the vehicle parked in the VIP spot directly next to mine. It was a sleek, custom-ordered matte black Maybach. The steel head of the golf club shattered the luxury vehicle's passenger side window with an explosive crash. Glass rained down across the polished concrete. Jason swung again, completely smashing the custom rearview mirror off its housing. This is what happens when you disrespect family, Jason yelled, pointing the club at me, completely out of breath. Before he could take another swing, the echoing wail of sirens filled the underground garage. The building's private security team had been monitoring the live camera feeds the entire time. Within seconds, 2 security vehicles converged on us. 4 heavily armed guards sprang out, drew their weapons and ordered Jason to drop the club. Jason froze, his arrogant bravado vanishing instantly. He dropped the golf club and the guards tackled him hard against the cold concrete floor, snapping heavy metal handcuffs around his wrists. He writhed on the ground, screaming that I had set him up, but I simply watched in silence as the Chicago police arrived to officially place him under arrest. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a brightly lit interview room at the downtown police precinct, giving my official witness statement to a detective. The door to the main holding area was open, allowing me a clear view of the front desk. My father, Richard, stormed through the double doors of the precinct. He looked frantic, his usual polished suburban dad aesthetic entirely replaced by sweaty desperation. The police had called him to process Jason's bail. Richard spotted me sitting in the interview room. He marched straight past the desk sergeant, his face purple with rage. "What did you do to your brother, Richard?" bellowed across the precinct, ignoring the police officers commanding him to step back. "You framed him. You baited him into an argument to get him arrested. You are a sociopath, Rebecca. I will make sure you pay for whatever damage you caused." I did not have to say a single word in my defense. The heavy glass doors of the precinct swung open again, and the entire room seemed to suddenly pull the oxygen from the air. Maxwell Thorne walked in. How is a legendary figure in Chicago? A ruthless, self-made real estate billionaire known for entirely transforming the city's commercial skyline. He was notoriously strict, commanded absolute respect, and was regularly featured on the covers of national financial magazines. My father, who obsessed over wealth and business elites, recognized him the absolute instant he walked into the room. Richard froze completely. His jaw went slack. He immediately tried to smooth his wrinkled shirt, his tone completely changing from enraged father to groveling subordinate. "Mr. Thorne," Richard stammered, stepping forward with an eager, nervous smile. "What an absolute honor. I am Richard. I follow all of your development projects. I am here because my son had a slight misunderstanding." Maxwell Thorne did not even glance at my father. He treated Richard like an invisible speck of dust. He walked straight past him, stepped into the interview room, and looked down at me with a loud, booming laugh that echoed off the precinct walls. "Rebecca, my favorite co-investor," Thorne said warmly, extending his hand to help me stand up. "I leave my car in your corporate VIP lot for 1 hour to grab a coffee, and the police chief calls to tell me a lunatic just took a 9-iron to my Maybach." Richard looked as though the floor had vanished beneath him. His eyes bulged as he stared at me, the daughter he had told to go rent a cheap apartment now standing shoulder to shoulder with a man whose net worth exceeded the gross domestic product of small countries. The realization that Jason had not just vandalized a random car, but had committed a felony against a billionaire titan washed over Richard's face in a wave of pure, unfiltered terror. "It was a slight family misunderstanding, Maxwell," I replied, offering a sharp, brilliant smile as I shook the billionaire's hand. "My brother has some anger management issues. I apologize for the damage to your vehicle." Thorne waved his hand dismissively, laughing again. "Please do not apologize for a vandal. You hold the controlling interest in the most lucrative commercial block in the city right now, Rebecca. If someone is bothering you, they are bothering my investments. And I do not take kindly to people who threaten my business partners. I was just telling the chief of police out in the hallway about your anonymous acquisitions out on the south side. Pure genius. Now tell me, Rebecca." Thorne turned slowly, his sharp, predatory gaze finally landing on my father's pale, horrified face. "Should we let your corporate legal team handle this mess, or should I personally press maximum felony destruction charges against this guy's son?" My father stood frozen in the brightly lit precinct. The color drained from his face as Maxwell Thorne, the billionaire real estate titan he had idolized for years, made it clear that Jason had damaged a vehicle worth more than my father's remaining liquid savings. Richard could not form a coherent sentence. He just stared at me, his discarded daughter standing beside one of the most powerful developers in Chicago. I did not need a criminal spectacle to make the point. Thorne's attorney explained that the police report and security footage would be preserved, while Thorne would pursue full restitution for the Maybach through a civil claim. Jason still had to answer for the arrest and the property damage, but the immediate financial consequence was enough to crush what little cushion my parents had left. Thorne's legal team sent a settlement demand, backed by repair estimates, loss of use costs, and the footage from the garage. Richard panicked at the thought of a public lawsuit attached to Jason's name. To settle the claim quickly, he drained a large portion of his available savings and paid the restitution. My parents convinced themselves they had protected their golden boy and contained the disaster. They had not. They were catastrophically wrong. The real devastation arrived exactly 3 weeks later. The Chicago City Council held a public press conference on a Tuesday morning. The preliminary zoning motions were officially and unanimously approved. The massive vacant lot located just 3 blocks behind Jason's neoclassical dream home was formally designated as the site for a new heavy industrial waste processing plant. The news hit the local real estate market like a seismic shockwave. By Wednesday afternoon, the algorithms on every major property valuation website had updated. The estimated value of Jason's neighborhood plummeted by a staggering 60% overnight. The pristine suburban legacy my parents had funded with an $88,000 down payment was instantly transformed into a toxic, depreciating liability. Jason was heavily underwater, owing hundreds of thousands of dollars more than the property would ever be worth, all while trapped under the crushing weight of the 14% secondary mortgage he had unknowingly signed over to my anonymous lending firm. Ashley did not stick around to play the supportive, loyal wife. The moment the zoning news broke and the reality of Jason's financial ruin became public knowledge, her affection evaporated. She realized the lavish neoclassical lifestyle she had endlessly bragged about on social media was actually a sinking crater of high-interest debt and offshore crypto gambling losses. She packed her designer bags while Jason was out meeting with his frantic loan brokers. She hired a ruthless family law attorney, took their children, and filed for immediate divorce. She demanded alimony, child support, and her share of the marital assets, entirely unaware that the only asset Jason truly possessed was a mountain of rapidly defaulting loans. Jason was left completely alone in an empty, depreciating house, drowning in a sea of red ink. The sheer scale of the disaster finally broke my parents' pride. The desperation drove them to cross the boundary they swore they would never cross again. My office phone rang late on a Thursday afternoon. I answered, and Patricia's voice came through the speaker. She did not yell. She did not hurl insults. She sounded ragged, exhausted, and remarkably fragile. She demanded we meet at a sterile midtown coffee shop the following morning to discuss an urgent family emergency. I agreed purely because I wanted a front row seat to their absolute desperation. I arrived at the coffee shop wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit, projecting absolute professional authority. Patricia and Richard were already sitting at a small corner table. They looked like they had aged a full decade in a matter of weeks. The polished superior aura they usually carried had completely vanished, replaced by the heavy sunken posture of people who were rapidly running out of options. "Sit down," Rebecca Richard said, his voice lacking its usual booming command. I took the seat across from them, maintaining perfect upright posture. I did not order a drink. I just waited for them to lay their cards on the table. "Your brother is going through an incredibly difficult transition right now." Patricia began, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her paper coffee cup. "Ashley has filed for divorce. She is trying to take everything. The city rezoned his neighborhood and his property value has collapsed. He is facing total financial ruin." "That is unfortunate," I replied, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "But I recall you both telling me that Jason was a brilliant financial strategist. I am sure he factored industrial waste zoning into his portfolio management." "Do not play games right now," Richard snapped through the fire and his eyes quickly dimmed. "We had to liquidate a significant portion of our retirement accounts to pay off the damages for that incident in the parking garage. We are cash poor. We cannot write him another check to bail him out of this mortgage crisis. We need a permanent solution to keep a roof over his head." Richard reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, legally binding document printed on heavy stock paper. He slid it across the table toward me, placing a pen directly on top of it. "This is a formal waiver of inheritance," Richard explained, avoiding my direct gaze. "We are restructuring our estate planning. Since you have made it abundantly clear that you only care about yourself and your own career, we are legally transferring the deed of our primary suburban home entirely to Jason. We are giving him our house so he has a secure place to live and rebuild his life. We need you to sign this waiver, renouncing any future claim to the property, so the transfer can clear the municipal courts without delay." I looked at the thick stack of legal papers. My parents were willing to sign away the very home they lived in, the ultimate symbol of their wealth and status, just to shield their golden boy from the consequences of his own spectacular failures. They wanted me to officially sign away my birthright so Jason could have a free house after destroying the one they had already bought for him. I did not pick up the pen. I did not look at the signature line. I leaned back in my chair, steepled my fingers, and let a slow, freezing smile spread across my face. "You are giving him the house," I repeated, ensuring I heard their absurd plan correctly. "You are transferring the deed of your primary residence to Jason to save him from homelessness." "Yes," Patricia urged, pushing the document an inch closer to me. "It is the only way to protect the family legacy. Sign the paper, Rebecca. Be useful for once in your life." I reached out, placed my manicured fingertip on the center of the document, and slowly slid it right back across the table until it touched my father's hands. I looked directly into his tired, desperate eyes. "Which house are you planning to give him?" "Dad," I asked, my voice dropping to a deadly, perfectly articulated whisper. "The one you are currently living in. Or the one he secretly stole the deed to and heavily mortgaged 8 months ago to cover his offshore crypto gambling debts." The absolute silence that fell over our small corner table was deafening. The ambient noise of the midtown coffee shop, the hissing of the espresso machine, the gentle clinking of ceramic mugs, and the low chatter of businessmen all seemed to fade into the background. Richard and Patricia sat entirely frozen, their eyes locked on me as if I had just spoken to them in a foreign language. My father's hand, which had been resting on the edge of the table, began to tremble. A slight involuntary tremor that betrayed the polished authoritative facade he had spent decades building. "What are you talking about?" Richard demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh, breathy whisper. "What do you mean he mortgaged our house? That is physically impossible. My name and your mother's name are the only ones on that deed." I looked at him with a mixture of pity and absolute disdain. "Your names were the only ones on the deed until you transferred the property into that living trust last year, Dad. You made Jason a co-trustee with broad signing authority because you kept saying he was the only child qualified to manage the family estate. That authority gave him access to the property as collateral. When the industrial rezoning crushed the value of his Oak Park house and his crypto losses triggered new demands for cash, he used your home to secure another loan without telling you. You handed a desperate gambler control over your largest asset, and he used it to keep himself afloat. Patricia physically recoiled, pressing her back hard against the coffee shop booth. The cognitive dissonance was washing over her face in real time. She was completely incapable of processing the fact that her golden child was a financial predator. "You are lying!" Patricia gasped, her voice rising in pitch, drawing the attention of a nearby table. "Jason would never do that to us. He loves this family. If he signed something, he was scammed. Those predatory lenders must have tricked him into signing paperwork he did not understand. He is a victim in this. I is a 35-year-old senior manager who used the co-trustee authority you handed him to borrow against your home and feed a gambling addiction, Mom." I corrected her, keeping my voice calm and level. He knew what he was doing. Richard ran a heavy hand over his face. The color had completely drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking frail and remarkably old. The realization was sinking in, bypassing his denial and settling directly into his bones. But true to the deeply ingrained toxic dynamic of our family, my parents could not place the blame on the golden child. Their minds instantly pivoted, desperately searching for a way to make Jason's catastrophic failure my fault. Richard slammed his fist onto the small table, rattling our water glasses. He leaned forward, his eyes blazing with a sudden irrational fury. "You work in this industry," Richard hissed, pointing an accusing finger directly at my chest. "You are an investment analyst. You study market trends and real estate acquisitions every single day. If you knew the zoning laws in Oak Park were changing, why did you not warn him? If you knew he was getting involved with predatory lenders, why did you not step in and stop it? You purposely withheld information. You let your own brother fall into a financial trap just to spite us." Patricia immediately seized on this new narrative. She leaned across the table, her eyes wide with manufactured outrage. "Your father is right," she snapped, her voice trembling with misplaced righteous indignation. "You knew he was struggling and you sat back and watched it happen. You should have been monitoring his investments. You should have guided him. You have always been jealous of his success, Rebecca. You deliberately let him lose everything." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I leaned back comfortably in my chair, buttoned my tailored charcoal suit jacket, and offered them a smile entirely devoid of warmth. "Warn him?" I asked smoothly, tilting my head in mock confusion. "Guide his investments. Why on earth would I do that, Mom? I am just a single woman. What could I possibly know about building a family legacy or managing complex real estate portfolios?" I watched their expressions falter as I threw their exact humiliating words right back into their faces. "I remember sitting at a very expensive steakhouse 2 years ago." I continued, my voice sharp and precise. "I remember asking for a tiny, fully secured bridge loan. You both looked me in the eye and laughed. You told me that a single woman had no business buying property. You told me to go rent a cheap apartment somewhere and leave the real estate investments to the man of the house. You told me Jason was the pillar of the family, and that my financial independence was a complete waste of resources." Richard opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off immediately. "So I took your advice," I said, maintaining absolute freezing eye contact. "I went back to my rented apartment. I focused on myself. I stayed entirely out of the pillar's business. I let the man of the house manage his own brilliant financial strategy. How was I supposed to know he would burn your entire kingdom to the ground?" Patricia let out a strangled sob, burying her face in her hands. She was finally realizing that there was no scapegoat left to carry the weight of Jason's sins. There was no one left to blame. The golden child had destroyed them, and the daughter they had discarded was completely untouchable. Richard, desperate to reclaim some fraction of his shattered authority, abruptly turned away from me. He aggressively signaled for the waiter, raising his hand high in the air. "Check," Richard barked at the young man hurrying over to our table. "Bring the check immediately. We are done here." The waiter quickly printed the receipt for their 2 coffees and my sparkling water. He placed the small black leather folder on the table. Richard, desperate to project the illusion of wealth and control, pulled a heavy metallic platinum credit card from his wallet and tossed it onto the tray without even looking at the total. "Take it," Richard snapped at the waiter. I watched in absolute silence as the young man walked back to the register. The tension at the table was suffocating. Patricia was frantically trying to call Jason, her phone pressed tightly against her ear, but the call kept going straight to voicemail. Jason was likely hiding in his empty, depreciating house, terrified to face the parents he had just bankrupted. Less than 2 minutes later, the waiter returned. He looked deeply uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He leaned down slightly, keeping his voice discreet to avoid embarrassing my father. "I apologize, sir," the waiter murmured, holding the platinum card out. "But this card has been declined." Richard snatched the card back, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "That is impossible!" Richard snapped, digging into his leather wallet again. "It is a premium account with a limitless balance. Your machine must be malfunctioning. Try this one. It is tied directly to my executive checking account." He handed the waiter a dark blue debit card. The waiter nodded nervously and hurried back to the register. Patricia lowered her phone, her eyes darting between her husband and the waiter. "Richard, what is going on?" she asked, her voice tight with rising panic. "Why would the platinum card decline?" "It is just a bank error, Patricia," he grumbled, refusing to look at me. "Probably flagged for fraud protection. It happens all the time with high net worth accounts." A few moments later, the waiter returned. The uncomfortable look on his face had deepened into genuine pity. He placed the blue debit card gently on the table. "Sir, I am incredibly sorry, but this card has also been declined for insufficient funds. The terminal says the account balance is overdrawn." Richard stared at the blue plastic card as if it were a venomous snake. He grabbed his cell phone from his pocket and frantically opened his mobile banking application. I sat perfectly still, watching the exact moment his entire reality shattered. When my parents gave Jason his lavish down payment 2 years ago, they had also proudly provided him with supplementary cards tied to their primary accounts, claiming it was for emergency household expenses. They trusted him implicitly. They never checked the balances because Jason was their perfect, successful son. I watched Richard's eyes widen in absolute horror as the account dashboard loaded on his screen. His breathing became shallow and rapid. Patricia grabbed his arm, leaning over to look at the phone. She let out a sharp, breathless gasp, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. Jason had not just secretly mortgaged their house. When the offshore crypto platforms demanded more cash to cover his spiraling losses, he had completely drained their checking accounts. He had maxed out every single supplementary credit line he had access to. He had financially bled them dry down to the last available cent. They were sitting in a coffee shop wearing expensive designer clothes, completely and utterly broke. They could not even afford to pay for 2 cups of coffee. I calmly reached into my purse, pulled out a crisp $5 bill, and laid it neatly on top of the black leather folder to cover the cost of my sparkling water. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored suit, and picked up my briefcase. I looked down at my parents. They were staring at the phone screen, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic reality of their choices. "It looks like the pillar of the family just collapsed," I said, my voice quiet, even, and remarkably peaceful. "Good luck with your rent, Dad." I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, stepping into the bright, bustling streets of Chicago. I did not look back. I had a multi-million-dollar real estate empire to manage, and I had absolutely no intention of letting their wreckage slow me down. The brisk Chicago wind hit my face the moment I stepped out of the coffee shop, carrying with it the undeniable scent of absolute victory. I had left my parents staring at a declined debit card and a negative bank balance. I did not waste a single second wondering how they managed to pay for their overpriced lattes. My focus was already fixed on the aggressive expansion of my real estate portfolio. For Jason, the collapse was rapid because the foreclosure process had already been moving behind the scenes. He had missed required payments, ignored notices, and exhausted the short cure periods while trying to cover losses with more debt. By the time I left my parents at the coffee shop, his lenders were no longer negotiating. Less than 2 weeks later, the final possession deadline arrived at the neoclassical Oak Park property. Jason left under court, enforced foreclosure, carrying garbage bags filled with designer clothes he had never truly paid for. Ashley was gone, his accounts were frozen, and the house he had called his family legacy no longer belonged to him. The golden child had exactly one place left to go. He moved back into my parents' house in the northern suburbs. The pristine, meticulously curated home that Patricia and Richard had used to project their illusion of immense wealth was immediately transformed into a toxic containment zone. Jason took over their fully finished basement, but his misery quickly infected the entire property. From the updates my former neighbors gladly shared with me, I learned that Jason spent his days aggressively drinking cheap beer and screaming at his phone trying to harass his former crypto brokers. He left empty bottles strewn across Patricia's expensive Persian rugs. He threw his unwashed laundry over the custom Italian leather sofas. The house constantly reeked of stale alcohol and suffocating resentment. Richard and Patricia were entirely trapped. They could not kick him out because they still viewed him as the victim of a cruel financial market. But the reality of feeding and housing a furious, unemployed 35-year-old man on a completely drained bank account was pushing them to the absolute brink of insanity. 2 weeks into Jason's occupation of their basement, my personal cell phone buzzed. I was sitting in the back of a luxury town car heading toward the financial district. The caller ID displayed an unknown number, but the moment I answered, the voice was unmistakable. Rebecca, darling. Patricia said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet manufactured warmth that made my skin crawl. It is your mother. Please do not hang up. We need to have a calm, mature conversation. I leaned back against the leather seat, staring out the tinted window at the towering skyscrapers. I am listening, Patricia. Make it quick. She cleared her throat completely, ignoring the fact that I refused to call her mom. Your brother is going through a very dark time right now, she began, adopting the tone of a weary but dedicated martyr. Living in the basement is severely damaging his mental health. He feels completely stripped of his dignity. He needs a fresh start in the city, closer to the corporate hubs, where he can network and find a new executive position. I remained perfectly silent, waiting for her to reach the inevitable delusional demand. Since you are just single and do not have a family to care for. Patricia continued her fake sweetness, beginning to crack under the strain of her own entitlement. Your father and I think it would be best if you let Jason take over your apartment. Just for a few months. You can easily crash on a co-worker's couch or rent a tiny studio further out in the suburbs. Jason needs to be downtown to reclaim his alpha mindset. You owe it to this family to help him get back on his feet. The sheer, unadulterated audacity was breathtaking. They had publicly disowned me, bankrupted themselves to protect him, and were now demanding I surrender my home to the man who caused their ruin. You want me to vacate my home, I said, keeping my voice dangerously level, so a bankrupt gambling addict can live there for free to reclaim his alpha mindset. Do not use that nasty tone with me, Patricia snapped, her true colors instantly bleeding through the facade. You are just a renter, Rebecca. You do not own anything. It is just a temporary apartment. You can move your things into storage this weekend. Give your brother the keys by Monday morning. It is the least you can do after you deliberately withheld information about the zoning laws and let his property value collapse. I let out a short, freezing laugh. I remember you explicitly telling me to go rent an apartment because real estate was reserved for the men of the family. It sounds like the man of the family failed. I do not accommodate squatters, Patricia. Tell Jason to get comfortable in the basement. I ended the call and blocked the new number before she could scream another insult. My refusal to surrender my home was the final spark that ignited Jason's fragile, volatile ego. He could not physically intimidate me, and he could no longer use his parents' wealth to bludgeon me. He turned to the only weapon he had left. Later that evening, my phone began vibrating continuously with notification alerts. A younger cousin from out of state sent me an urgent text message telling me to check the extended family Facebook group immediately. I opened the social media application and found a massive, sprawling post written by Jason. He had tagged every single aunt, uncle, and cousin in our family tree. Jason had written a completely unhinged manifesto designed to salvage his shattered pride by tearing me down. He claimed that the only reason I had an apartment in the city was because I was sleeping with a much older, wealthy man who paid my bills. He spun a wild, desperate narrative portraying me as a highly toxic, manipulative woman who was trying to ruin the family out of sheer jealousy. My sister is nothing but a pathetic sugar baby, renting a closet in the city. Jason wrote in bold letters at the very top of the post. She likes to act tough and pretend she understands finance, but everyone knows she is just trading favors to cover her monthly lease. She refused to help our parents in their time of need because she spent all her allowance on designer bags to impress her old boss. She does not own a single thing to her name. She is just a renter acting like she rules the world. Do not believe a word she says. Underneath the post, a few distant relatives who had always fed off Patricia's toxic gossip were already leaving sympathetic comments offering Jason their prayers and condemning my supposed lifestyle. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. A younger, weaker version of me would have immediately drafted a furious response. I would have posted the screenshots of his offshore crypto gambling losses. I would have exposed the 14% secondary mortgage. I would have defended my honor and my career to a group of relatives who had never genuinely cared about me in the first place. But the woman I was now did not waste time arguing with bankrupt men on the internet. I closed the application, swiped away the notifications, and turned my phone entirely on silent. I was not sitting in my apartment. I was sitting at the head of a massive, polished obsidian conference table on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass panels, the entire city of Chicago was laid out beneath me like a glittering grid of lights. Sitting across from me was a team of highly nervous corporate attorneys representing a major real estate syndicate. Lying on the desk between us was a stack of finalized acquisition contracts easily measuring 3 inches thick. I was not renting a closet. I was in the final stage of aggressively purchasing the Apex Tower. The Apex was a crown jewel in the Chicago real estate market. It was a massive, ultra-luxury, high-rise apartment complex located squarely in the most expensive, highly sought-after district of the city. The building boasted private rooftop pools, a state-of-the-art fitness center, a concierge service, and over 200 of the most exclusive high-end residential units in the entire state. The syndicate had been struggling with internal management disputes and needed immediate liquidity. My anonymous holding company had swooped in and outmaneuvered 3 other major corporate buyers by offering an all-cash zero-contingency buyout. While Jason was furiously typing away in my parents' dark, foul-smelling basement trying to convince our distant cousins that I was a destitute sugar baby who did not own a single asset, I was finalizing a multi-million-dollar transaction that would make me one of the most powerful residential landlords in the metropolitan area. Ms. Rebecca, the lead attorney for the syndicate, said, his voice laced with profound respect as he slid a gold-plated pen across the obsidian table. The escrow funds have been fully verified. The title transfer is ready for your authorization. The entire complex is yours. I picked up the heavy pen. I thought about my father telling me I was a single woman who had no business buying property. I thought about my mother demanding I move into a basement. I thought about Jason calling me a pathetic renter on the internet to soothe his own crushing failures. I did not feel angry. I felt absolute undeniable power. I pressed the pen to the heavy parchment and signed my name with bold, sweeping strokes on the final page of the contract. I stood up, shook the attorney's hand, and looked out the window at the gleaming high-rise tower that now belonged entirely to me. My family wanted to play games on social media. I was busy buying the board. The ink on the final acquisition documents for the Apex Tower was completely dry. I spent the next 3 weeks methodically restructuring the management syndicate, auditing the existing financial ledgers, and silently transferring the massive property into the ironclad portfolio of my anonymous holding company. My days were consumed by high-level executive meetings and aggressive corporate overhauls. I did not spare a single thought for the toxic wasteland of my parents' basement. I was far too busy cementing my status as one of the most formidable residential landlords in the Chicago metropolitan area. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when I scheduled my first official in-person site inspection of the Apex Tower. I arrived at the grand sweeping entrance of the ultra-luxury high-rise, wearing a sharply tailored navy blue suit, projecting absolute undeniable authority. The lobby was a breathtaking masterpiece of modern architecture. It featured towering 40-foot ceilings, imported Italian marble floors that gleamed like glass, and massive floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the entire space in natural light. I was walking alongside Mr. Harrison, the newly appointed Director of Human Resources for the complex, and a small entourage of senior property managers. They were guiding me through the ground-level operations, hanging on to my every word, incredibly eager to impress their new, highly demanding owner. As we approached the sleek, curved mahogany reception desk, I noticed a solitary figure sitting rigidly on one of the plush velvet waiting sofas. It was Jason. The visual contrast between the man sitting on that sofa and the arrogant golden child from the steakhouse 2 years ago was staggering. Jason looked terrible. He was wearing an old, ill-fitting suit that was visibly wrinkled and hung loosely on his frame, a clear consequence of the weight he had lost since his eviction. His posture, which used to radiate unearned superiority, was slumped and defensive. He was aggressively bouncing his knee, clutching a cheap plastic clipboard, and sweating under the soft ambient lighting of the luxury lobby. I paused my stride, holding up a single manicured hand to halt my executive team. "Mr. Harrison," I asked quietly, keeping my eyes fixed on the man on the sofa, "why is there a candidate waiting in the main lobby?" Mr. Harrison immediately stepped forward, looking slightly embarrassed. "I apologize for the visual clutter, ma'am. We are conducting open interviews this morning to fill a vacancy on our overnight security staff. That applicant is waiting to submit his background check paperwork." The golden child of the family, the brilliant financial strategist who was supposed to build a generational legacy, was sitting in a lobby waiting to beg for a minimum wage night shift guarding a building. The absolute undeniable poetry of the universe was almost too beautiful to comprehend. Before I could instruct Mr. Harrison to dismiss him, Jason looked up from his clipboard. His bloodshot eyes locked directly onto my face. For a fraction of a second, I saw raw, unfiltered humiliation wash over his features. He was caught at his absolute lowest point, desperate and degraded, completely stripped of his parental safety net. But true to his deeply ingrained toxic nature, Jason could not handle the vulnerability. Instead of showing an ounce of humility, his fragile ego instantly flared into aggressive defensive arrogance. He shot up from the velvet sofa, dropping the pen he was holding, and marched straight toward me. "Well, look who it is," Jason scoffed, his voice obnoxiously loud, echoing off the pristine marble walls. The pathetic sugar baby finally showed her face in public. Mr. Harrison and the rest of my management team froze in absolute shock. They stared at the wrinkled, sweating applicant approaching their billionaire boss, as if he had just lost his mind. "What are you doing in a place like this?" Rebecca, Jason sneered, stopping just a few feet away from me. He crossed his arms over his chest, desperately trying to project dominance. "Did your wealthy old sponsor finally get tired of paying your rent and kick you out of your little closet? Or are you here begging to join the janitorial staff so you can scrub these floors for a living? I told Mom and Dad you would end up on the street once your looks faded." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I just let him dig his grave deeper and deeper into the bedrock of his own delusion. Mr. Harrison immediately stepped forward, his face flushed with professional outrage. "Excuse me, Sir," Harrison barked, positioning himself between me and my brother. "You will not speak to her in that manner. I am going to have to ask you to leave the premises immediately." I reached out and placed my hand gently on Mr. Harrison's arm, signaling him to step back. "No, Mr. Harrison," I said smoothly, my voice echoing with a terrifying, freezing calm. "Let him finish. He seems to have a very firm grasp on how the world works. Tell me more, Jason. You seem to be doing so incredibly well for yourself these days." Jason took the bait entirely, his chest puffed out, emboldened by my apparent willingness to listen. "I am doing what real men do, Rebecca." He spat, gesturing aggressively with his hands. "I am taking a transitional role to network with the elite residents of this building. I am climbing back to the top of the corporate ladder, while you are out here trading favors just to survive. You refused to help me when I needed it, and now you are exactly where you belong. A total, utter failure, standing in a lobby you could never afford to live in." I let his words hang in the air for 5 full seconds. I let the absolute silence of the grand lobby amplify the sheer, unadulterated stupidity of his rant. I turned my head slightly, looking at my Director of Human Resources. "Mr. Harrison," I said softly. "May I see the applicant's paperwork, please?" Mr. Harrison immediately bowed his head in a gesture of profound, undeniable respect. He stepped past Jason, retrieved the cheap plastic clipboard from the waiting sofa, and handed it directly to me with both hands. "Of course, Madam Chairman," Harrison said, his voice ringing with absolute reverence. "Here is his resume. How would you like us to proceed with his application?" The color instantly drained from Jason's face. His aggressive posture collapsed. He stared at Mr. Harrison, his eyes wide with wild, panicked confusion. He looked at the surrounding property managers, who were all staring at me with the exact same level of deferential respect. Then his horrified gaze snapped back to me. Madam Chairman, Jason repeated, his voice dropping to a hoarse, trembling whisper. "What is he talking about? Why did he call you that?" I looked down at the wrinkled, poorly formatted resume clipped to the plastic board. I saw his desperate plea for $15 an hour. I saw the massive gaps in his employment history. I saw the absolute ruin of the golden boy. I unclipped the resume from the board, folded it neatly in half, and held it out toward him. I smiled, and it was a smile completely devoid of mercy. "I am not here applying for a job, Jason," I said, my voice carrying the crushing absolute weight of my empire. "And I am not renting a closet. I own this entire building. I own the marble you are standing on. I own the doors you walked through. And I own the company you just desperately begged for a paycheck." Jason took a stumbling step backward. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The cognitive dissonance was shattering his mind in real time. The sister he had just publicly degraded on Facebook, the woman he had claimed was a destitute sugar baby, was standing before him as the supreme owner of the most exclusive real estate in the city center. I tossed his folded resume onto the marble floor directly at his feet. "This application is permanently rejected," I declared, looking him dead in the eye. "My luxury complex does not employ unstable applicants with a documented arrest and a recent property destruction incident in an underground parking garage." Jason's knees physically buckled. He swayed on the spot, his breathing shallow and rapid. The realization that I was the one who had witnessed his arrest, the one who held the power to grant or deny his basic survival, hit him like a freight train. "Mr. Harrison," I continued, not breaking eye contact with my brother, "please have security escort this rejected applicant off my property. If he ever sets foot in this lobby again, have him arrested for criminal trespassing." I turned on my heel, the sharp click of my designer heels echoing off the Italian marble. I walked toward the private secure elevators, with my executive team falling seamlessly into step behind me. I did not look back as the security guards approached. Jason grabbed him by the arms of his wrinkled suit and forcibly dragged the shattered pillar of the family out into the cold, unforgiving Chicago streets. The moment the heavy glass doors of the Apex Tower swung shut, leaving Jason out on the freezing Chicago pavement, his entire fabricated reality fractured. He did not possess the financial resources to call a luxury rideshare, and he certainly did not have a personal vehicle. He was forced to walk 3 blocks to the nearest transit station, nursing his bruised ego, and using the last few dollars on his transit card to take a commuter train back to the northern suburbs. When he finally burst through the front door of my parents' house, he was hyperventilating. His wrinkled suit was soaked in cold sweat, and his hands were shaking violently. Richard and Patricia were sitting at the kitchen island, surrounded by a mountain of past-due bills and final collection notices. They looked up, startled by the manic energy radiating from their golden child. "She owns it!" Jason shouted, his voice cracking with absolute hysteria as he paced the kitchen floor. "Rebecca owns the entire building." The management team was bowing to her. The security guards threw me out on her command. "She is not renting a closet, Mom. She is the supreme landlord of the most expensive high-rise in the city. She has millions." Patricia dropped the utility bill she was holding. She stared at Jason, her expression completely blank for 5 seconds before her brain aggressively rebooted. To accept that her discarded daughter was a multi-millionaire, while her chosen son was a bankrupt failure, would require Patricia to admit that her entire worldview was wrong. And my mother was biologically incapable of admitting fault. "Do not be ridiculous, Jason," Patricia scoffed, waving her hand dismissively as she stood up from the island. "You are letting your anxiety get the better of you. Your sister does not own a luxury high-rise. She is a 33-year-old spinster who crunches numbers in a cubicle." "I saw it with my own eyes," Jason yelled, pointing frantically toward the city. The director of human resources called her Madam Chairman. Patricia let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed off the granite countertops. Madam Chairman, oh please, she probably started sleeping with the property manager to get a break on her rent. You know how desperate she is for attention. That man probably let her walk around the lobby acting important just to humor her. It is a pathetic power trip, Jason. She is a glorified assistant playing dress-up. Do not let her little charade intimidate you. Richard nodded firmly, aggressively clinging to the delusion. Your mother is right. Rebecca is extremely manipulative. She knew you were looking for work downtown, and she set up a theatrical performance just to humiliate you. We need to focus on real problems right now. The bank is being completely unreasonable about this mortgage situation. They desperately wrapped themselves in their blanket of denial, entirely unaware that reality was already marching up their front steps. The foreclosure on my parents' house did not appear out of nowhere. Jason had already missed required payments on the loan he placed against the property through the trust, and the lender had sent default notices, acceleration letters, and a final demand. Richard dismissed every envelope as a clerical mistake and kept insisting his lawyers would reverse it. By the time a judge signed the order granting possession to the lender, my parents had exhausted the last delay available to them. The following morning, loud authoritative knocks rattled their custom mahogany doors. Richard opened them expecting another collection notice and found two county sheriff's deputies beside a representative from the lender's foreclosure division. Richard, the representative, said the court-ordered possession date is today. Your prior notices have expired. You need to collect your essential belongings and leave the property. My father's face drained of color. He gripped the doorframe hard enough to whiten his knuckles. You cannot do this. We are disputing that loan. My son was taken advantage of. We have lived here for decades. One deputy handed him a copy of the signed writ. Sir, the foreclosure was finalized and the possession order was served in advance. You were given the required notice. We are here to enforce it. We will give you 1 hour to gather medication documents, clothing, and other immediate essentials. After that, the property must be surrendered. Patricia ran into the foyer, clutching her silk robe, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. She watched as the deputies stepped past her pristine threshold, their heavy boots tracking dirt onto her expensive rugs. The sanctuary she had used to judge and belittle everyone else was no longer hers. The next 60 minutes were a masterclass in absolute degrading panic. The golden child who had caused this entire disaster was completely useless. Jason sat on the floor of the basement, frantically shoving his designer shoes into black plastic garbage bags. Patricia ran through the upper floors, hysterically crying, as she tried to decide which pieces of jewelry and designer clothing to save, abandoning decades of accumulated superficial wealth. When the hour was up, the deputies escorted them out the front door. The bank representative changed the locks with a heavy metallic click that echoed across the quiet suburban street. My parents and Jason stood on the sidewalk at the end of their driveway, surrounded by a pathetic pile of garbage bags and hastily packed suitcases. The crisp morning air bit through their thin clothing. Down the street, the neighbors my mother had spent years trying to impress were standing on their porches watching the spectacle with undisguised fascination. The prominent perfect family was being unceremoniously thrown into the gutter. Richard, desperate to salvage any remaining shred of his alpha male authority, pulled his cell phone from his pocket. He squared his shoulders and turned to his weeping wife. "Stop crying," Patricia, Richard ordered, his voice shaking, despite his best efforts to sound commanding. "We are not going to stand here like vagrants. I am going to call the premier property management conglomerate in Chicago. We will rent a luxury penthouse downtown temporarily until my lawyers obliterate this bank in court. We will show these people that we are not beaten." He turned his back to the staring neighbors and dialed the main corporate leasing number for the largest residential management firm in the state. He did not know that my anonymous holding company had recently executed a massive aggressive merger that brought this exact leasing firm entirely under my corporate umbrella. A senior leasing agent answered the call promptly. "Good morning, residential leasing. How may I assist you today?" "Yes, I need to secure an immediate high-end temporary lease," Richard said, using his most demanding, arrogant tone. "I require a premium 3-bedroom unit in your most exclusive downtown building. Money is absolutely not an issue, but I need the keys by this afternoon. My name is Richard, and I expect prioritized service. Of course, sir, the agent replied smoothly, her keyboard clacking in the background. I can certainly expedite your application. I just need to collect some basic personal information to run our standard system-wide background and financial screening. Richard confidently provided his full legal name, his social security data, and the details for Patricia and Jason, insisting that they be listed as authorized occupants on the luxury lease. Please hold for just a brief moment while the system processes the underwriting, the agent said politely. Richard lowered the phone, offering a smug, reassuring nod to Patricia. See, I told you. They are running the application right now. We will be looking out over the city skyline by dinner time. 2 minutes later, the leasing agent returned to the line. The warm, accommodating customer service tone she had previously used was completely gone. Her voice was now replaced with the cold, sterile efficiency of corporate rejection. I apologize for the delay, Richard the agent said flatly. However, I am looking at your application results, and I must inform you that you have been flagged with an immediate system-wide denial. Richard frowned, pressing the phone harder against his ear. What do you mean a denial? Run it again. There must be a glitch in your software. I am a senior corporate executive. There is no glitch, sir, the agent replied, her tone completely devoid of sympathy. The underwriting algorithm indicates a catastrophic credit score collapse, a massive volume of unsecured debt, and an active finalized foreclosure on a primary residence as of this morning. Furthermore, the secondary occupant you listed has a documented history of severe financial default. You are considered an extreme high-risk liability. Do you have any idea who you are speaking to? Richard bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. I demand to speak to your manager. I will have your job for this insolence. You cannot deny me housing based on a temporary banking error. I am the senior manager on the floor, sir, the agent countered smoothly, entirely unfazed by his aggression. And shouting at me will not alter corporate policy. Every single property in our metropolitan portfolio is strictly off-limits to your profile. Your application has been permanently locked out of our entire residential network. Richard felt his chest tighten. The reality of his situation was closing around his throat like a vice. He was standing on a sidewalk with garbage bags, and the largest housing provider in the city had just declared him unrentable. Listen to me, Richard begged, his arrogant tone finally cracking into pure desperation. We have nowhere else to go. We have the cash for a security deposit. I just need someone with the authority to bypass the computer system and approve this lease. There has to be a way to override a rejection. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. There is only one way. A system-wide high-risk denial of this magnitude can be overridden, the agent stated, her voice dropping to a final, absolute conclusion. It requires a direct in-person review and a physical signature from the supreme head of our corporate board. Your application would have to be personally approved by the chairman. Richard lowered the phone from his ear, a frantic, desperate gleam replacing the initial shock in his eyes. He turned to his wife and son, entirely twisting the leasing agent's absolute rejection into a warped glimmer of hope. The system locked us out because of a minor technicality with the foreclosure coding, Richard announced, projecting a hollow, booming confidence. But the agent just told me exactly how to fix it. We just need to go downtown and speak directly to the chairman of the corporate board. These automated systems are designed to filter out the working class, but a corporate chairman will instantly recognize our pedigree. We just need to sit down man to man, explain the clerical error regarding the secondary mortgage, and he will override the system. Patricia clasped her hands together, letting out a shaky breath of profound relief. Of course he will. He will, she agreed immediately. We are high net worth individuals. We simply need to present ourselves to the executive suite and demand proper service. No intelligent businessman would turn away a family of our social standing over a minor zoning issue. Jason nodded eagerly, aggressively clinging to the delusion. His designer clothes were completely wrinkled, and he smelled faintly of cheap beer from his time in the basement, but he still tried to stand tall. I will talk to him, Jason declared. I am a senior manager. I know how to speak the language of the elite. Once I explain how those predatory lenders scammed me, he will probably offer me a job in his acquisitions department. They piled their black plastic garbage bags and hastily packed luxury suitcases into a cheap rented moving van they had secured earlier that morning. They drove straight toward the heart of the Chicago financial district, entirely fueled by their own bottomless arrogance. During the painful commute, they completely ignored the reality of their situation. Patricia kept listing the specific amenities she expected in their temporary penthouse, demanding a lake view and a 24-hour concierge service. Jason kept practicing his firm handshake in the rearview mirror, utterly convinced that his undeniable charm would secure them a multi-million-dollar lease despite his destroyed credit score. The corporate headquarters of the city's largest residential management conglomerate was located inside a towering ultra-modern glass skyscraper. The lobby was a massive expanse of polished white marble, featuring an indoor waterfall and a sleek circular reception desk manned by 4 impeccably dressed staff members. It was a cathedral of modern wealth designed specifically to intimidate anyone who did not belong. Richard, Patricia, and Jason marched through the revolving glass doors. They looked entirely out of place. They were disheveled, exhausted, and carrying the undeniable aura of financial ruin. Yet they still walked with their noses pointed squarely at the ceiling. Richard approached the front desk, slapping his palm flat against the cold marble surface to demand immediate attention. "I am Richard, and I am here to see the chairman of the board." He barked at a young, highly professional receptionist. "I have a critical residential application that requires his personal immediate override. Tell him a fellow corporate executive is waiting in the lobby." The receptionist did not flinch. She maintained a perfect customer service smile, tapping her manicured fingers against her keyboard. "I apologize, sir," the receptionist replied smoothly. "The chairman does not take unscheduled walk-in appointments under any circumstances. If you have an issue with a residential application, I can direct you to our standard appeals department on the 3rd floor." "I am not going to any appeals department to sit with common applicants." Richard sneered, his face flushing a dangerous shade of red. "I was specifically told that only the chairman can clear a system-wide denial. I am not leaving this desk until you pick up that phone and call the executive suite. Tell him it is regarding a high-net-worth portfolio error." Patricia stepped up beside her husband, leaning aggressively over the marble counter. "You clearly have no idea who you are dealing with, young lady." Patricia hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "We are a highly respected family from the northern suburbs. We are personal friends with some of the most powerful developers in this city. If you do not grant us access to the executive floor right now, I will personally ensure you are fired before lunch." The receptionist remained perfectly calm, though she discreetly slid her hand beneath the desk to press a silent security button. "Ma'am, threatening our staff will not alter corporate policy," the receptionist stated firmly. "The executive suite is entirely restricted. You need to lower your voice, or I will have security escort you out of the building." Jason slammed his fist against the counter, completely losing whatever fragile grip he had left on his temper. He leaned over, pointing a shaking finger directly at the woman's face. "Listen to me, you glorified secretary," Jason yelled, his voice echoing loudly across the pristine lobby and drawing the stares of passing businessmen. "We just had our entire estate stolen from us by predatory lenders. We have our belongings sitting in a moving van on the street. We are not leaving this building without a luxury lease. Go fetch your boss right now before I go up there and kick his door down myself." The sheer volume of Jason's outburst immediately triggered a response. From the shadows of the lobby pillars, 4 massive, heavily muscled security guards in dark suits moved swiftly toward the reception desk. They formed a solid, impenetrable wall between my family and the elevators. "Sir, you need to step away from the desk and exit the building immediately," the lead security guard ordered, resting his hand near his utility belt. "You are trespassing on private corporate property." "I am not going anywhere," Richard roared, his pride entirely blinding him to the danger. "I demand to see the chairman. Bring him down here right now. I demand respect. We are a legacy family. We will not be treated like street trash." Patricia began screaming that they were being discriminated against, while Jason aggressively shoved his shoulder against the lead security guard, trying to push his way toward the elevator bank. It was a chaotic, humiliating, and entirely pathetic display of absolute entitlement. The guards easily overpowered Jason, grabbing him by the arms and twisting him backward, preparing to physically throw the entire family out onto the pavement. But before the guards could drag them through the revolving doors, a deep, resonant electronic chime echoed through the lobby. The massive frosted glass double doors located at the far end of the ground floor, doors that led directly to a private, hyper-secure executive elevator, began to slowly slide open. The lead security guard immediately froze. He released his grip on Jason's arm and instantly stood at rigid attention. The other guards followed suit, snapping into perfect, respectful formation. The entire lobby went dead silent. The receptionist stopped typing. The passing businessmen paused in their tracks. The atmosphere in the room shifted from chaotic to utterly reverent in the span of 2 seconds. Richard, Patricia, and Jason stopped struggling. They turned their heads toward the sliding glass doors, their eyes wide with sudden, breathless anticipation. They genuinely believed their loud, obnoxious demands had successfully summoned the elite corporate savior they were looking for. They straightened their wrinkled clothes, trying to instantly manufacture an aura of dignity. 2 towering, elite personal protection agents stepped through the frosted glass doors first. They scanned the lobby with cold, calculating eyes before stepping aside to clear the path. Then the chairman walked out. I stepped onto the polished marble floor wearing a flawless, custom-tailored crimson power suit that radiated absolute terrifying authority. My posture was impeccable. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of my designer heels echoed through the completely silent lobby like the ticking of a metronome. I held a sleek leather tablet under one arm, looking entirely bored by the disruption in my building. I stopped exactly 10 feet away from my family. Richard's jaw dropped open so fast it looked painful. His eyes bulged out of his head, rapidly darting between my face, my elite security detail, and the terrified, respectful posture of the lobby staff. Patricia let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp. Her hands flew up to cover her mouth, her eyes welling with a sudden, overwhelming flood of pure shock. Jason staggered backward, his knees physically giving out. He bumped hard into the reception desk, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The arrogant, aggressive man, who had just threatened to kick down the executive door, was now staring at his own sister as if she were a ghost holding a loaded weapon. I looked at the 3 of them, taking in their wrinkled clothes, their sweaty faces, and their absolute, undeniable ruin. They had come to the heart of the city to beg a corporate titan for mercy. They had demanded to see the supreme head of the board to override their catastrophic failures. I tilted my head slightly, offering them a freezing, razor-sharp smile. "You requested a meeting with the chairman," I said, my voice cutting through the silent lobby with devastating precision. "I have a very busy schedule today, Dad, so tell me, why exactly are you screaming at my receptionists?" The silence that followed my question was absolute. Richard's mouth hung open, his eyes darting frantically between my tailored crimson suit and the towering security detail flanking my sides. He looked like a man trying to read a map written in a language he did not speak. The cognitive dissonance was simply too massive for his brain to process. His discarded daughter, the woman he had ordered to go rent a cheap apartment, had just walked out of the most exclusive executive suite in Chicago. Patricia was the first to break the silence. True to her deeply ingrained nature, she violently rejected the reality standing right in front of her. Her mind scrambled to construct a narrative that fit her incredibly narrow worldview. She took a tentative step forward, her face twisting into a grotesque, forced smile that did not reach her eyes. "Rebecca, darling." Patricia cooed, her voice trembling with manufactured warmth as she clasped her hands together. "Oh my goodness, you almost gave me a heart attack. You work here. Are you the chairman's new executive assistant? I had no idea you left your old investment firm." I did not move a single muscle. I just stared at her, letting the sheer absurdity of her assumption hang in the air. Patricia took my silence as confirmation. Her fake smile widened, emboldened by her own delusion. "Well, this is just a spectacular coincidence," she continued, waving her hand dismissively toward the reception desk. "We were just having a minor misunderstanding with the staff. Since you clearly have a direct line to the top floor, be a good girl and go tell your boss that your parents need a favor. Tell the chairman we need an immediate override on a luxury lease application. We are family, after all." I am sure you can pull a few strings to get a penthouse for your brother. Jason nodded eagerly, instantly latching onto Patricia's fantasy. His posture straightened, returning to his default state of unearned arrogance. Yeah, Rebecca, go do your job, Jason ordered, thrusting his chin out. Tell your boss I am a senior manager, and I am willing to consult for this firm if he clears our application today. Just get us the keys so we can get our things out of the moving van. I did not even have to open my mouth to shatter their pathetic illusion. The man standing to my right, Mr. Prescott, the ruthless chief legal officer of my entire corporate syndicate, stepped forward. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks and looked at my family as if they were chewing gum stuck to the bottom of his expensive Italian loafers. An assistant Mr. Prescott repeated, letting out a sharp, incredulous scoff that echoed across the marble lobby. Are you completely out of your minds? You are not standing in front of an assistant. You are standing in front of Chairman Rebecca, the sole owner and chief executive of this entire residential management conglomerate. Patricia flinched physically, stumbling backward, as if Mr. Prescott had struck her across the face. What are you talking about? She gasped, clutching her chest. That is impossible. She is just an analyst. She rents a small apartment. Mr. Prescott did not stop. He pulled a sleek digital tablet from his jacket and began reciting facts with the cold, mechanical precision of an executioner delivering a final sentence. Chairman, Rebecca, does not just own this management firm. Prescott announced, his voice booming with absolute terrifying authority. She is the sole proprietor of 45 high-yield commercial and luxury residential complexes across the greater Chicago metropolitan area. She is the anonymous buyer who recently acquired the Apex Tower in an all-cash buyout. Every single building your application was just denied from belongs entirely to her. You are standing in her lobby, breathing her air, and demanding favors from a woman whose net worth dwarfs your entire ancestral lineage. The words hit my family like physical blows. The color completely drained from Richard's face. His legs trembled under the sudden crushing weight of the truth. He looked at the heavy frosted glass doors I had just walked through. He looked at the elite security guards standing at attention. He finally looked at me, seeing me not as his scapegoat daughter, but as the supreme, untouchable titan of the Chicago real estate market. You, Richard choked out, his voice a hoarse, ragged whisper. You are the anonymous landlord. You bought the estate next to our house. You own the private lending firm that Jason used. Yes, Dad, I replied, my voice smooth and freezing cold. I own the firm that held the 14% second mortgage on Jason's Oak Park house. I own the management company whose system just denied your rental application. I own the Apex Tower, and I own the estate beside the home you just lost. I told you real estate was a smart financial move. You should have listened. Patricia let out a high-pitched wailing sob. Her knees gave out and she sank onto a nearby velvet waiting bench, burying her face in her trembling hands. The grand, pristine image she had maintained her entire life was entirely eradicated. She was broke, homeless, and completely at the mercy of the daughter she had aggressively abused and thrown away. She wept loudly, realizing that the bridge she burned was the only one that could save her from living on the street. But Jason did not weep. Jason did not reflect. The golden boy's fragile, inflated ego violently shattered. The realization that I had succeeded on a scale he could not even comprehend completely broke his mind. He looked at my designer suit, my security team, and my absolute power. Instead of accepting his own spectacular failures, his brain twisted the narrative into the ultimate desperate delusion. He could not accept that he was the architect of his own ruin. You stole it! Jason screamed, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of purple. The entire lobby went dead silent again. The passing businessmen stopped completely, turning to watch the spectacle unfolding by the reception desk. You stole my money, Jason roared, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger directly at my face. That is how you did it. You set up that predatory loan. You stole the equity out of my house. You took my $88,000 and used it to buy all of this. You are a thief, Rebecca. You stole my legacy to build your empire. He completely ignored the fact that he was the one who voluntarily gambled away his loans on unregulated offshore crypto platforms. He ignored the fact that my empire was built through grueling work and strategic acquisitions long before he ever signed that contract. In his deranged mind, I was the villain, and he was the victim. I am taking it back. Jason bellowed, his eyes wide with unhinged feral rage. I am taking my life back right now. With a primal, guttural scream, Jason lunged forward. He balled his hands into tight fists, sprinting across the polished marble floor, fully intending to physically assault me in the middle of my own corporate headquarters. He did not even make it 3 steps. My elite personal protection agents moved with terrifying, lightning-fast precision. Before Jason could even raise his arm to strike, 2 massive guards intercepted his path. The lead guard grabbed Jason by the lapels of his wrinkled suit, violently twisted his momentum, and brutally slammed him face first onto the freezing hard marble floor. The impact echoed through the lobby with a sickening thud. The second guard immediately pinned Jason's arms aggressively behind his back, pressing a heavy knee firmly between his shoulder blades. The golden boy was completely neutralized, pinned to the cold stone floor, while the entire corporate staff watched his ultimate humiliation unfold. Jason let out a muffled, pathetic groan against the polished Italian marble. The heavy knee of my elite security agent remained planted firmly between his shoulder blades, ensuring he could not move a single inch. The arrogant man who had stormed into my building, demanding a luxury penthouse, threatening to kick down my doors, was now eating dust in the lobby of a high-rise he could never afford to rent. The sight of their precious pillar physically subdued and entirely defeated was the final fatal blow to my parents' fragile reality. The last remaining shred of their suburban superiority violently evaporated. Richard's knees physically gave out. He collapsed heavily onto the velvet waiting bench beside Patricia, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. The sharp, commanding corporate executive who had barked orders at my receptionist just 10 minutes ago was completely gone. In his place sat a broken, bankrupt man who had just realized he was entirely at the mercy of the daughter he had thrown away. Patricia slid off the velvet bench. In a display of sheer, unprecedented desperation, my mother actually dropped to her knees on the cold marble floor. The designer silk skirt she was wearing pooled around her legs, accumulating dust from the shoes of the security team. She did not care about the staring businessmen. She did not care about the security cameras or my management team watching her. She looked up at me, her face streaked with heavy dark mascara tears, her perfectly highlighted hair falling out of place. "Rebecca, please!" Patricia wailed, her voice echoing shrilly across the grand lobby. "Please, you have to help us. The bank locked us out this morning. They threw our belongings onto the sidewalk in garbage bags. We have absolutely nowhere to go. You own 45 buildings. You own thousands of luxury apartments across this city. Just give your father and me and your brother one single unit. Just a place to sleep. We are begging you." Richard slid off the bench, sinking down onto his knees right beside his weeping wife. The sight of my father, a man who had demanded total submission from me my entire life, kneeling on the floor of my corporate headquarters was profoundly satisfying. "We were wrong." Richard choked out his voice, a ragged, humiliating whisper. "We were so entirely wrong about the $88,600. We made a terrible mistake giving it to Jason. We should have listened to you. We should have given you the bridge loan. Please, Rebecca. We are your blood. You cannot leave your own family to freeze on the streets of Chicago." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the 3 of them. Jason was still pinned to the floor, turning his head just enough to watch his parents beg. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy. I did not feel the sudden, overwhelming urge to forgive them that society expects from dutiful daughters. I felt cold, calculated justice. I held out my right hand without looking away from my kneeling parents. Mr. Prescott, my chief legal officer, anticipated the exact gesture. He stepped forward, his Italian leather shoes clicking softly, and placed a heavy leather-bound financial ledger directly into my palm. I opened the ledger, the crisp pages rustling in the quiet lobby. "You were not just wrong about the $88,600, Dad," I said, my voice echoing with terrifying, absolute clarity. "You were wrong about exactly who possessed the intelligence to build a legacy. You told me that a single woman had no business buying property. You told me to go rent a cheap apartment and leave the real wealth to the men of the family. You called me a glorified calculator." I held the ledger up, displaying the aggressive exponential growth charts of my corporate acquisitions. After you refused the $15,000 bridge loan, I used my own savings and the $20,000 personal credit line the bank had approved to buy a ruined, foreclosed building on the south side. I continued speaking slowly, so every word landed. I studied the public transit plans you claimed I could not understand bought before the neighborhood changed, and turned that first risk into leverage for the next acquisition. One property became 2 commercial lots. Those became 4 buildings. Then came the apex and the rest of this syndicate. I took a step closer, towering over my kneeling parents. The scent of their cheap panic sweat mixed with the lobby's ambient floral fragrance. I built a multi-million-dollar real estate empire in complete secrecy, using nothing but raw intellect and relentless discipline, I declared. Meanwhile, your brilliant financial strategist took your $88,600, bought a house on top of a toxic waste dump, and gambled away your entire retirement fund on offshore crypto platforms. You handed a fortune to an arrogant fool, and he rewarded you with a foreclosure. I asked for a fraction of that support, and you slapped me across the face and told me I was a liability. Patricia buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The undeniable, brutal truth of my words stripped away her last remaining defense mechanism. She could no longer pretend I was lucky or manipulative. She had to face the undeniable fact that her daughter was a financial genius and her son was a catastrophic failure. Her golden child had bled them dry, and her scapegoat had conquered the city. "We will do anything," Richard pleaded, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes and tracking down his pale, wrinkled cheeks. "Just tell us what to do, Rebecca. We have absolutely nothing left. We surrender. Just please do not let us die on the street. We will agree to whatever you want." I closed the leather ledger with a sharp, definitive snap. I looked down at the pathetic, ruined remains of the family that had abused me for 3 decades. They were offering me total, unconditional surrender. I snapped my fingers once. The security guards immediately released the pressure on Jason, grabbing him by the back of his collar and hauling him roughly to his knees, so he was forced to kneel in a perfect, humiliating line next to my parents. Jason did not fight back. His spirit was entirely broken. "You will do anything," I repeated, letting a slow, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. "That is exactly what I was hoping you would say." I turned my head toward my chief legal officer. "Mr. Prescott, please bring me the special residential leasing contract we drafted this morning." Mr. Prescott reached into his tailored jacket and produced a thick stack of legal documents. He handed them to me with a dark, knowing smirk. I took the contract, feeling the heavy weight of the paper, and looked back down at the 3 people kneeling on my marble floor. "I am not a monster," I said smoothly, my voice dripping with lethal corporate authority. "I will provide you with a roof over your heads. I will give you a place to sleep within my residential empire. However, the lease you are about to sign comes with a few mandatory, non-negotiable conditions. And I assure you, it will be the most demanding, degrading agreement you have ever signed in your entire lives." I gestured to Mr. Prescott. He stepped forward with cold, mechanical precision and placed a thick, heavily stapled document directly in front of my father. "This is a standard, non-negotiable residential and employment contract." I began, my voice ringing with absolute corporate detachment. "I own a large portfolio of older multifamily walk-ups on the south side. One of those buildings has a subterranean maintenance unit. It is a dark, windowless, 1-bedroom basement apartment with exposed pipes and concrete floors. That is where you and Mom will be living." Patricia let out a strangled, horrified gasp. She stared at me as if I had just ordered her execution. "A windowless basement. Rebecca, we cannot live in a maintenance closet. We are respected members of society. We have beautiful antique furniture. We have a certain standard of living that must be maintained. Your furniture is currently sitting on a sidewalk inside black plastic garbage bags." I reminded her sharply, completely unmoved by her tears. "And your standard of living was repossessed by the bank this morning. You will take the basement unit, or you will take a spot under a highway overpass. Those are the only 2 options available to you in this city." Richard stared at the heavy contract, his hands trembling violently. "And how are we supposed to pay the rent for this basement? We have no liquid capital. Our accounts are entirely overdrawn." I shifted my gaze to Jason, who was still kneeling on the marble floor, his designer suit completely ruined by the dust of my lobby. You are not going to pay the rent, Dad. The pillar of the family is going to pay it for you. Jason looked up, his bloodshot eyes wide with sudden frantic panic. I do not have a job. I told you I am completely bankrupt. The secondary mortgage wiped out everything. I know. I smiled, a slow, predatory expression spreading across my face. That is why I am offering you employment within my corporate syndicate. You are going to work off your secondary mortgage debt, your parents' monthly rent, and your own basic living expenses. Jason's posture straightened just a fraction. Even at his absolute lowest, surrounded by security guards and facing total ruin, his delusion tried to claw its way back to the surface. You are giving me a corporate job, an executive role in your acquisitions department. I can rebuild my portfolio and pay you back with aggressive market strategies. I am giving you a job as a roaming sanitation technician. I corrected, watching the tiny spark die in his eyes. You will work overnight and early morning shifts across my residential properties. You will mop floors, empty industrial trash bins, and scrub public toilets. Your wages will be handled under a written repayment plan prepared by counsel. After taxes and the amount the law requires you to keep, the authorized portion will go toward your outstanding debt and your parents' rent. You will receive no executive title, no special schedule, and no family privilege. You will use the service entrances and public transit like every other employee in that position. If you miss work without cause or violate the lease, the housing arrangement ends. You cannot do this to me, Jason yelled, trying to struggle against the heavy grip of the security guards holding him down. I am a senior manager. I have a master's degree. I am not scrubbing toilets for a living. I am not a servant. You do have a choice, Mr. Prescott interjected, his tone cold and final. Refuse this employment and housing agreement and walk out today. Then Mr. Thorne's judgment remains enforceable, your debts remain, and your parents' rental application stays denied. If you accept, counsel will document the repayment plan, lease, and employment terms separately. No one is sending you to prison for refusing a job. No one is required to rescue you from consequences you created. Decide whether you want the offer. The fight completely drained out of them. It evaporated into the cold, air-conditioned atmosphere of the lobby. They had spent their entire lives treating me like a subordinate, demanding I scrub their floors, demanding I surrender my hard-earned salary, and demanding I sacrifice my future for their comfort. Now the universal scales were violently and permanently balancing themselves. Richard picked up the gold-plated pen with a shaking hand and signed his name on the dotted line, officially surrendering his status as a wealthy suburban patriarch. Patricia followed, weeping openly, as she scribbled her signature, mourning the permanent death of her country club royalty. Finally, the security guards hauled Jason to his feet. They handed him the clipboard. Tears of pure, unadulterated humiliation spilled down his face, dropping onto the legal parchment as he signed away his pride and legally bound himself to a mop bucket. Exactly 1 week later, the new reality was in full brutal effect. Jason was stripped of his tailored suits, his expensive watches, and his arrogant swagger. He was forced into a stiff, heavy gray canvas uniform bearing the embroidered logo of my property management firm. His soft, manicured hands, which had only ever typed on keyboards and held expensive glasses of vintage bourbon, were now raw, calloused, and blistered from harsh industrial cleaning chemicals. He was living on a lumpy mattress in the corner of his parents' dark, windowless basement apartment, waking up at 4 in the morning to catch the commuter train. His assignment for that specific Tuesday morning was the ground-floor public amenity wing of the Apex Tower. It was the exact same ultra-luxury building where he had arrogantly tried to humiliate me in the reception area. Jason was on his hands and knees inside the grand marble-lined public restroom. He was sweating profusely, his gray uniform clinging to his back. He was gripping a cheap plastic toilet brush, scrubbing away the grime of the wealthy elite tenants who actually belonged in the building. Every single swipe of the brush was a devastating physical blow to his fragile ego. He finished cleaning the stall, dropped the brush into his yellow plastic caddy, and pushed his heavy, squeaking cleaning cart out into the opulent sunlit hallway. He kept his head down, staring at the floorboards, desperately hoping to avoid making eye contact with any of the residents. He was strictly forbidden from speaking to the tenants. He pushed the cart toward the private high-speed elevator banks, intending to clear the trash receptacles in the waiting area before his mandatory 15-minute break. Just as he approached the polished steel doors, a soft melodic chime rang out. The elevator floor indicator flashed, showing it was descending directly from the penthouse level. The heavy metal doors slid open. Jason looked up and his heart completely stopped beating in his chest. Stepping out of the private elevator was Ashley. She looked absolutely stunning. The stress of being married to a bankrupt, angry gambling addict was entirely gone from her face. She was wearing a breathtaking high-end designer coat, diamonds sparkling at her throat, and carrying a pristine luxury handbag that cost more than Jason would earn in 2 years of manual labor. But she was not alone. Her arm was linked intimately with a tall, distinguished, clearly affluent older man wearing a bespoke suit. Walking right beside them was my senior leasing agent holding a leather clipboard and smiling warmly. As you can see, the views from the top-floor penthouse are simply unmatched in the entire city, the leasing agent explained, gesturing gracefully toward the lobby. It is the perfect space for a fresh start, and the building amenities are maintained to the absolute highest standard. It is absolutely gorgeous. Ashley laughed, a light, carefree sound that echoed beautifully down the marble hallway. My fiancé and I will take it. We want to sign the lease today. Jason stood completely frozen next to his yellow cleaning cart. He gripped the plastic handle of his mop so hard his knuckles turned white. He was wearing a sweat-stained janitor uniform smelling of bleached cheap soap and profound failure. Ashley turned her head to look down the hallway. Her eyes landed directly on the sanitation worker blocking her path. The carefree smile instantly vanished from her face. It was replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock, which rapidly melted into absolute freezing pity. She looked at the toilet brush sitting in his yellow caddy. She looked at his gray, ill-fitting uniform. She looked at the man who had promised her a sprawling suburban legacy, who had relentlessly bragged about his financial genius, now reduced to literally scrubbing the waste of her new wealthy neighbors. Ashley did not say a single word. She did not offer a greeting. She simply tightened her grip on her new fiancé's arm, turned her head away in disgust, and walked right past him without a second glance. Jason's legs gave out. He collapsed heavily against the handle of his cleaning cart, sliding down the pristine marble wall until he hit the floor. The golden child, the undeniable pillar of the family, buried his face in his raw, blistered hands, completely crushed under the suffocating weight of his own profound, inescapable humiliation. Exactly 1 year later, the harsh, biting winds of the Chicago winter whipped violently against the reinforced floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my private penthouse. I was standing on the top floor of the Apex Tower, looking down at the sprawling, snow-covered grid of the city. The storm outside was brutal, but inside my home the atmosphere was a masterpiece of absolute warmth, curated wealth, and undeniable triumph. I was hosting my first annual Thanksgiving gala. The massive open-concept living space was filled with the soft, elegant melodies of a live jazz quartet. The air was rich with the scent of roasted duck-white truffles and vintage champagne. But unlike the toxic, performative holiday dinners of my past, this room was not filled with people who demanded my submission. I was surrounded by top-tier real estate developers, influential corporate executives, and the fiercely loyal members of my executive team. Mr. Prescott was engaged in a lively debate about commercial zoning laws by the fireplace, while Mr. Harrison laughed over a cocktail with my chief financial officer. I had meticulously built an empire, and I had populated it strictly with people who respected the architect. I excused myself from a conversation with a prominent tech investor and walked quietly down the long, art-lined hallway toward my private study. I closed the heavy oak door behind me, sealing off the music and the laughter. I walked over to my polished mahogany desk, picked up my encrypted tablet, and opened the master security application for my residential network. I tapped the screen, bringing up the live exterior feeds for the Apex Tower. Down on the ground level, out in the unforgiving, freezing darkness of the service alley, the security cameras captured a solitary figure fighting against the blizzard. It was Jason. He was wearing a heavy bright yellow reflective hazard coat over his thick gray sanitation uniform. His shoulders were hunched defensively against the howling wind as he strained to push a massive rusted industrial dumpster across the ice-slicked pavement. The Golden Child, the man who had demanded a neoclassical estate to build a generational legacy, was currently slipping on black ice while hauling the discarded food scraps and empty wine bottles from my Thanksgiving party. He looked exhausted, his face red and wind-burned, his posture entirely defeated. There was no arrogance left in him. The brutal daily reality of manual labor had completely pulverized his unearned sense of superiority. I swiped the screen, switching the feed to the internal security cameras of the Southside walk-up where I housed my parents. The camera positioned in the subterranean hallway offered a clear view through the small barred ventilation window of their basement unit. The contrast between their former suburban kingdom and their current reality was staggering. Richard and Patricia were sitting at a cheap folding card table in the center of their windowless concrete box. They were not wearing designer clothes. They were wrapped in thick, worn sweaters, eating a basic, pre-packaged holiday meal out of aluminum foil containers. Even without audio, their miserable dynamic was incredibly obvious. Richard was gesturing angrily with his plastic fork, clearly blaming Patricia for something. Patricia was glaring right back at him, her face pulled into a permanent bitter scowl. They had spent decades blaming me for every minor inconvenience in their lives. Now locked in a dark pit, with absolutely no one else to target, they had inevitably turned their venom completely on each other. Their toxic, superficial marriage was slowly eating itself alive in the dark. I locked the tablet and set it face down on the desk. I did not feel a single drop of pity. They were exactly where they belonged, safely contained within the consequences of their own malicious choices. A soft knock on my study door pulled me from my thoughts. My executive assistant stepped into the room, offering a polite professional nod. "The production crew is ready for you in the library, Madam Chairman," he announced quietly. "They have finished checking the lighting and the audio levels. The journalist is waiting." I smoothed the front of my tailored emerald green silk dress and walked confidently out of the study. Forbes magazine had spent the last 3 months aggressively requesting an exclusive sit-down interview with me. The rapid hostile expansion of my real estate syndicate had made massive waves across the national financial sector. The media was absolutely fascinated by the anonymous female investor who had systematically conquered the Chicago housing market in total secrecy before stepping into the light. I had finally agreed to a live broadcasted profile piece, hosted right here in the library of my penthouse. I walked into the room and took my seat in a plush leather armchair positioned perfectly in front of the towering bookshelves. The lighting was immaculate, highlighting the stunning panoramic view of the snowy city skyline behind me. A highly respected senior financial journalist sat across from me reviewing his notes as the camera operators counted down to the live broadcast. We covered my acquisition strategies, the structural reorganization of my holding companies, and my predictions for the commercial housing sector over the next fiscal quarter. I answered every question with the sharp, effortless precision of a woman who completely dominated her industry. As the interview neared its conclusion, the journalist leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. He looked at me with a spark of genuine professional curiosity. "Your rise to the top of the Chicago real estate market has been nothing short of meteoric," the journalist noted, his voice carrying the smooth cadence of a seasoned broadcaster. "But the rumors surrounding your beginnings are quite fascinating. Wall Street insiders love a good origin story. There is a very persistent rumor that before you built this multi-million-dollar empire, your own family refused to support your initial investments. I heard a story that they explicitly told you to give up on buying property and just go find a cheap apartment to rent." The journalist offered a slight knowing smile. "If that rumor is true," he continued, looking directly into my eyes, "how do you handle those conversations today? When your family asks you about your house now, how exactly do you reply to them?" The cameras zoomed in, capturing my face in crisp, high-definition focus. Millions of viewers across the country were watching. And down in a dark concrete basement on the south side of the city, I knew my parents were staring at a small, cheap television screen, watching the daughter they had thrown away, command the respect of the entire financial world. I reached over to the small marble side table and picked up my crystal flute of vintage champagne. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the crisp, expensive liquid cool my throat. I lowered the glass and looked dead into the primary camera lens, my expression radiating absolute, unapologetic power. "I just asked them," I said, my voice smooth, lethal, and perfectly calm. "Which one?" Looking back on the ashes of what used to be my family. The greatest lesson I learned is that true empowerment comes from walking away from toxic validation. For years, I believed that if I just worked hard enough, I could earn a seat at my parents' table. I thought my financial literacy and discipline would eventually win their respect. I was wrong. Their love was a rigged game designed specifically for me to lose. The turning point was not the moment I bought my first multifamily building, nor was it the day I acquired the luxury high-rise. The real turning point was the moment I stopped arguing with their delusions. When they told me I was nothing but a single woman who should go rent a cheap apartment, I stopped trying to prove my worth. I accepted their rejection, packed up my dignity, and walked out the door. I learned that the most devastating response to people who constantly belittle you is absolute deafening silence coupled with relentless action. You do not need to scream your goals from the rooftops. You do not need to beg for a bridge loan from people who want to see you fail. You just need to bet completely on yourself. Every time they tried to drag me down, I used that exact energy to lay another brick in my empire. I realized that blood does not guarantee loyalty, and family is not a license for financial or emotional abuse. Your worth is never dictated by the people who are too blind to see your potential. True justice is not found in screaming matches. It is found in surpassing their wildest expectations while they watch from the sidelines. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to build your own success, please share your story in the comments below.